We will now start exploring U.S. fertility in particular, and specifically how it's changed over time and factors that have led to this change. This is produced by the U.S. Congressional Budget Office. This particular one was from 2022. And it has a projection starting at the end of 2022 is here where you see the dotted line up and down, moving forward. Fertility rates rise for women of relatively older childbearing ages and fall for women of relatively younger childbearing ages. That pattern is consistent with the trends of delayed childbearing and rising average age of mothers. That does correspond with the demographic transition theories. In John Boncart's 1967 work on the determinants of fertility, he identified intercourse variables, including the age of entry into intercourse, permanent celibacy, reproductive periods spent between unions, voluntary and involuntary abstinence, coital frequency, and of course contraception, although in my opinion he had a bizarre connection to breastfeeding in his paper. Again, in an interesting perspective, John Bongartz only looked at women's fertility. He identified that permanent virginity is rare, but the longer she maintains, the lower her fertility will be. Before 1960 in the West, the age of marriage was usually the age of sexual union. However, that is no longer true, honestly, if it ever was. Here is one more recent research into the age at entry into sexual union. This happens to be on a paper exploring COVID-19 and later, and wondering how that the pandemic may have affected sexual unions. You can see here that according to them, men typically entered into sexual unions later than women. In this case, sexual unions is identified as marriage. And you can see that the age has significantly increased, especially since the 1940s. I think we all agree, however, that just because one is married does not mean that it's the beginning of your sexual debut. Here in this chart, you will see the percent of first births to unmarried individuals in green, the line of the median age of first birth among women of all mothers, and also the median age of first marriage. You can see there's a great crossover in 1988 where the median age of first birth goes under the median age of first marriage. Going back to Bongart's premise that permanent virginity is rare, but the longer one maintains it, the lower their fertility will be. Again, before 1960 in the West, the age at marriage was thought of as the age of sexual union. Well, while that may never have been true, it is certainly no longer true. Higher fertility results with younger childbearing ages. Bongartz identified permanent celibacy as those women who never marry. Highest permanent celibacy ever due to this definition was in Ireland in 1971. 18% of women aged 40 to 44 had never married. But let's be clear, never marry does not equal childless. Bongartz further identified that time between unions is a factor in fertility. Married people have more quote-unquote viable sex than unmarried people. Women who have been divorced have lower fertility than women who are married but have never been divorced. And couples in quote long-distance relationships have lower fertility rates. Although Bongart's original paper was in 1967, he did revise it 30 years later in 1997. When he was discussing voluntary abstinence, he identified that it was not very popular, and it was uncommon, except perhaps after the birth of a child, which is referred to the postpartum period. Postpartum sex is taboo in some places for up to 2 years. 37-year-old woman with 5 children doesn't want to have any more. The husband says no contraception, and so the woman says no more sex. As you note in the cartoon above, it says, now that you ask, why yes, I do use a form of birth control. The word is no. Involuntary abstinence is often associated with the type of job you have. If people work in transportation, such as truck drivers, or if people decide to have separate vacations, they have a tendency to be involuntarily abstinent. And other cases are medical reasons, either hospitalization or disease or the like. Also, another common involuntary abstinence is migration, particularly in the concept of labor separation. Many people will migrate away from their loved ones and send money back to them. This allows them to have lower fertility rates. In general, involuntary abstinence is still not very common and also not very popular. One thing that Bongards kept was accurate about and kept consistently in both of his papers was that the more sex one has, the more pregnancy that occurs. Of course. For example, among those who have participated in survey studies, those who report having sex 3 times per week, which is about 51%, tend to get pregnant in 6 months. If people report having sex 1 time per week, they tend to get pregnant. 32% of them tend to get pregnant in 6 months. So in general, there has been changes in marriage age and sex. For example, in the 1950s, married women aged 21 to 25 had twice as much sex as women aged 41 to 45 in survey data. In 2002, married women aged 21 to 25 have equal sex as women aged 41 to 45. The shift in sexual behavior among married women from 1950 to 2002 is often attributed to several social, cultural, and economic changes, which we will discuss in class. The next subject Bongards covered was conception variables. Interestingly, he identified breastfeeding as separate to contraception. There is no doubt that breastfeeding does prolong postpartum amenorrhea, which is a lack of menstruation, and does tend to suppress ovulation. There is research that indicates 2 months for women who don't breastfeed for amenorrhea and ovulation suppression, and a greater 10 to 18 months for women who do. However, it is absolutely clear that modernization reduces breastfeeding and breastfeeding declines as fertility declines. In 1991, 81% of college-degreed women breastfed, but less than 50% of their high school counterparts did. Breastfeeding rates are not only identified closely with education, but also by the mother's race and ethnicity. Here you can see that Asians have, or Pacific Islanders, have the highest initiation, actually Hispanics do as well. But at 6 months and at 12 months, as we progress from the left to right, from Asian, Pacific Islander, Hispanic, white, American Indian to black, you will see a significant decline in general of the percentage of women who are breastfeeding. Similarly, you will see a significant increase in breastfeeding as education increases. This recent CDC report identified the percentage of women currently using any contraception method among aged women 15 to 49, and by age group, Hispanic origin and race, and education from 2017 to 2019 in the United States. You will see overall there is a significant portion, 65.3% of women use contraception. Younger ages use less, older ages use more. Non-Hispanic white individuals have the highest use of contraception use. And by education, there is some difference, but not a lot. The following information about contraception methods is only in cases where there is no user error, where that is not occurring. It's interesting how they do this research, but I would like to emphasize that you must never underestimate the effects of user error, because all of these rates are in case, again, of no user error. Diaphragm being 94% effective, female condoms 95% effective, and IUDs over 99% effective. Chemical methods such as the quote-unquote pill, over 99% effective, implants and injections, all over 99% effective. As stated in Baumgart's 1967 paper and his revisit in 1997, and because of that precedent, many other demographers identify breastfeeding as 100% effective as a contraception. I feel like this is a theoretical statement, and among all the people I have ever interacted with, which include many doctors, women breastfeeding support group, and lactation consultants, this has never been true. As we go down from 100% theoretically, condoms have a 95% effectiveness as a contraception, withdrawal 90%, and the rhythm method 75%. It's interesting though, if an average couple were to spend a year doing nothing but relying upon chance to not get pregnant, there is an 85% chance that they would indeed get pregnant. There is also the possibility of voluntary infecundity, in other words, voluntarily becoming sterilized. For women or females, tubal ligation, which of course is getting your tubes tied, or hysterectomy are 100% effective once they have been solidified. And for males, vasectomy and castration, again, as long as they were successful procedures. Baumgart's last category for contraception, or lack of fertility in this case, is gestation variables, which have often been characterized as miscarriage, emergency contraception, and abortion. In this chart that was published in 2013, which is the quick stats of morbidity and mortality from the CDC, you will see that here the blue here, dark blue is pregnancy. These are live births. So between pregnancy and live birth, there is either abortion or fetal loss. Emergency contraception was not popular in 2013. We will go over that data in class. In conclusion, established originally by Baumgart's work and other demographers and population scientists, these are the proximate determinants of fertility: age of entry into intercourse, permanent celibacy, reproductive periods spent between unions, voluntary and involuntary abstinence, coital frequency, and contraception, with a very random connection to breastfeeding as contraception. For your quiz response, I would like you to develop a research proposal that investigates the impact of 2 or more select proximate determinants of fertility on fertility rates. Which determinants would you choose to study, and what hypotheses would you test?